So the purpose of this video is to give you a very quick overview of XOG. XOG stands for XML Open Gateway. It is the only supported API for Clarity, and it is a way of moving data. It was intended originally as a way of moving data from one Clarity system to another. It can be used at great need for importing data, but it's rather awkward and it's quite persnickety. So what I'm going to do here is show you a usage of XOG that can be done to do some quick, simple updates. If you really want to do a mass update or a mass input, then you're going to need to write a gel script that will parse a data file and construct individual XOG statements from each line in the data file and then XOG those in. And that is probably beyond the scope of anything that anyone at AZ is going to do, and you are likely going to need to either hire somebody that knows this stuff really well or contract out to get something like that done, because it is time consuming. Even for someone who knows it well, if you have less than several hundred records, it's easier to do it manually than it is to create the XOG file and the batch file and the gel script and use XOG to import. So with that said, here is a quick overview of XOG. There are a couple components of XOG that have to be installed on a local laptop. This is problematic with AstraZeneca because of the security on our laptops. You can't install things. So what I've done is I've installed XOG on my own personal laptop. That runs into problems because XOG requires a particular version of Java and the Java runtime environment, and it's not the latest version. So on my personal laptop I have the latest version of Java, therefore I can't run XOG. So I'm actually using an old laptop that I have reconstructed and configured specifically to be able to work with XOG, and I don't use it for anything else. So even under the best of circumstances, it's a pain. So in order to do this, you need to go into Clarity, go to the administration menu and go to Client Downloads. When you get there, you will see XML Open Gateway. There is a Windows installer and a cross-platform zip installer. If you use the Windows installer and run the installer program, the result won't work. So unless you're using Windows XP, then it works fine. But on Windows 7 or later, that doesn't work. So the way that you have to do it is go to the cross-platform zip. When you download that, you're simply going to get a zip file. You need to unzip that, and that will give you all the files that you need. Those files should be placed right under the C drive on your laptop. So if I look now under my C drive, I've got my C drive, CA, and then within the CA folder there are several folders. There's a bin folder that has the executables. There is an XML folder that contains sample XOG scripts, XML scripts, for a whole bunch of Clarity objects and object types. So I'm going to pick a really simple one. Let's suppose that I want to modify something on an existing Clarity resource record. So if I look down in the XML folder, I can find a file called RSM resources read. That's the XOG file that lets me read a resource from the RSM table. So what I normally will do is copy that file and then paste it into my bin file. So I've already done this. I've got RSM resources read, and if I take a look at this file, this is an XML file. It contains a header of information. Some of these are settings you can use to include contact information. I always want custom values. It doesn't hurt to pull all of this stuff, so I leave those all to true. Then down here I've got a query section. The query section lets you define exactly which resources you're trying to, in this case, read from Clarity. So I've got a comment here bounded by that and this, and the only thing that is not a comment is this last piece. So what I have here is a filter tag that goes with the query. The filter that I'm filtering on is resource ID, and the criteria is equals, and so I want a resource ID equals that ID. Now, that's one that just happens to be there. Let me look back into Clarity real quick, and the resource record that I'm going to actually get is I want Andrew Smith. So if I look at Andrew Smith's resource ID and copy it and go back to my XOG file here, I'm going to replace that ID. And I'm sorry, my mouse doesn't like to select very carefully. And I'll replace it with Andrew's. So I'm going to save that file. That's step one. Now I need to go into a XOG properties file. The properties file indicates the XOG or the Clarity host that you're trying to get to. Now this is an example properties file. I did not include details in this because this is a public video and I don't want people to be able to XOG into AstraZeneca's server. So you would substitute your server with whatever the name of your server is, and your username and password have to be the username and password on the Clarity system of a user who has XOG rights. So normally I put my ID and password in there. I'm not going to show you that one, but that's where you would put it. Then the key is these two lines that say input and output. So the input line needs to specify the XOG file that we just looked at. So in this case, this is not correct. It was RSM resources read. That's the source of the information that XOG needs to know what it is you're trying to do. You're trying to read a resource. The output is going to be an XML file, and you need to specify where you're going to put it. So the general convention is that the input file is a read, the output file is a write. However, the output file is not writing data to Clarity. It is preparing to write data to Clarity. So the output file is just an XML file that you can then XOG, which will then write data to Clarity. So it's a multi-step process. You need to prepare the read file to point to whatever it is you're trying to extract. When you extract it, you will end up with an XML file on your local machine. That file we name write, because what you're then going to do is go in and make whatever changes you want to make to that file and then write that data back into Clarity. And again, the original intent was you read data from one Clarity system and then you write it into another. So XOG creates this intermediate XML file on your local machine. So following the convention, I'm going to call that output equals resources write. And if I wanted to be really persnickety here, I would say RSM underscore resources write. That way these two kind of come in pairs. So I'm not going to worry about that one because that's not my actual properties file, but having done that, I now need to open up a command window. I need to change directory to the CA bin directory, and then what I need to do is execute a command that says XOG, and now as an option to this, hopefully you're familiar with command line interfaces, I give it a property file, and instead of example I'm going to use jki-dev.properties, which is my actual properties file. Looks just like the one I showed you, except it's got the correct server and username and password. So when I do that, it reads the read file, the input file, does whatever I'm telling it to do, and then writes output to the output file. And it tells me this succeeded. Processing complete, logout succeeded. So if I now look back in my bin directory, I have RSM resources read, and I have RSM resources write. So if I open this with, I usually open it with Notepad, there's the XML file. That's pretty ugly. It's a little bit easier to view if I just double click on it and it opens it up in the browser, and it's easier to read. However, I can't edit it here. So this is Andrew Smith's resource record as zogged out of Clarity. And indeed, if I look back here, there's Andrew, employee. His is pretty vanilla. There's not much here to see, but I can see that that's all of his data. So now, if I needed to change something, and I don't have much here to change, in fact, I should have picked a better one because I don't know that there is anything to change. I'll make him inactive. So if I want to make him inactive, what I can do is I can go to my out file. I can look for the active tag, which is right here. And again, I don't know why this mouse doesn't work very well. So I can change this to false. So I'm modifying the write file. I can save it. And now what I need to do is go back to my properties file, and instead of reading from the read file, I'm going to change this input to Zog to RSM resources write. So that's the one that I just modified. Now my output from the next step in Zog, I'm going to output to a file called out. And that's basically just a log that tells you what happened when you tried to run this write. So again, I'm not going to save that, but I've got another property file set up here called JKI dev2 that has all the right stuff in it. So if I go back to my command line window, I'm now going to say zog minus property file JKI dash dev. Oh, wait a minute, that's not right. Yeah, that's right. Dash dev2 dot properties. And it says request succeeded. If I go down here, I now will see RSM resources out. If I double click on that, it tells me updated 1 record, no failed records, status is success. This all looks pretty promising. So if I go back here and I return out of Andrew's record, Andrew Smith with the same ID is no longer there because he's no longer active. So if I filter now, I see my Andrew Smith. Let's make sure this is the right one. Where's my resources read? KXPX916, and there he is. So I have succeeded in making him inactive. So that is a very, very quick overview of Zog. It's an ugly tool. It works really slick for what it's designed for. Anything beyond that, it's pretty difficult. So hopefully this helps. Now that you know all about Zog, you rock.